Hi, and welcome to Soph's Fitness Lab. In this video, I'm going to explain to you the biology of why high-intensity training is so great and why cardio training, or low-intensity training, actually isn't giving you what most people think it's giving them. So often when someone wants to get more fit or make some kind of change to their body, there's the idea that, oh, I should go on a long run. I should be able to go on a long bike ride, and this is what will be helpful. But actually, doing shorter bursts of something that's much more demanding, like sprinting instead of jogging, or moving against a weight or a resistance instead of moving against the air. Actually, this high-intensity training is way more useful, and I'm going to explain why. First of all, let's think a little bit about what exercise is, because people exercise for all sorts of reasons, but it must have all something in common. So let's call exercise activity that creates a positive adaptation in your health and fitness. Okay, activity that creates a positive adaptation, a positive change. And what's fitness? Well, you could define it in different ways. The broadest way might be to say your physiological capability to meet a challenge that takes you beyond the resting state. Okay? A physiological capability. So if we think about creating a positive change, where does this change take place? Well, I want to explain why this change is crucially taking place in your muscular system, not in your cardiovascular system. There are also changes happening in your cardiovascular system, but what's happening in the muscles is A, amazing, and B, the key to making these changes. Okay, so we're going to zoom in and look at the processes happening inside your muscles while you're doing activity. After all, it's the muscles that create the movement, whether it's the movement of walking or sprinting or lifting weights. You're always using your muscles to create movement. Okay, so we're going to zoom into the muscle cell. The first key thing to understand is how muscles create energy. They need the energy to contract. They produce the energy by breaking down glucose and fat. And through that, you produce ATP, adenosine triphosphate. That's like your currency of energy inside the cell. First, we're going to concentrate on breaking down glucose. Glucose is this little yellow tennis ball for this demonstration. Okay? This glucose gets stored in your muscle cells in the form of glycogen. It's just a lot of them in a chain. In order to produce energy, a glucose gets cleaved off the glycogen storage, and it gets taken through a series of steps to produce a molecule called pyruvate. It's also a tennis ball, but a different color. Okay, that's about 20 steps. It happens in the main body of the cell, the cytoplasm. It happens without oxygen, so we can call it anaerobic, and it produces 2 ATP. That's not a lot, but it's some. Okay, so we have our little pyruvate molecule. Then this pyruvate gets taken into, here's a cone that I use for sprint training. It gets taken into the mitochondria, which is like a little unit inside your cell. And inside the mitochondria, the pyruvate goes around another long series of steps called the Krebs cycle, or the respiratory chain. This uses oxygen, so it's called aerobic respiration, and it produces 36 ATP. That's a lot. Okay, so we've got the first anaerobic stage, 2 ATP, and then the second aerobic stage, 36 ATP. These two stages, understanding that, is the key to everything. So, when you're doing what we might call aerobic activity, it means that you're using both of these stages, not just this one, both of these stages. It also means that this one is enough to keep up with your needs. It's a very slow process inside the mitochondria because it's so long. So if you're just walking along, it's enough to give you your energy needs. But if you start sprinting, this process is too slow. This process, the one that gives you just the pyruvate and produces 2 ATP, it can happen super fast. And so when you start running up the stairs, you're mainly relying on this part. The aerobic thing is still happening. It's just too slow to give you all your energy needs. The important thing to remember here is that both anaerobic and aerobic are always happening. So if we talk about training just the aerobic bit, it doesn't make sense because the anaerobic bit is also happening. Okay, now that we've got these basics, we're going to move to the first reason of why high intensity training is so excellent. And that is that training this first bit is what causes this second bit to get better. Okay? So that would mean training at a high intensity where you're having to do tons of this anaerobic bit. That is what makes the aerobic bit get quicker. Why? Because you produce so much of this pyruvate, it's as if it's like knocking on the doors of the mitochondria saying, hey, 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 you need to speed up. And when you finish training, in the recovery period, you've still got all this pyruvate still knocking on the doors of the mitochondria saying, use us up, use us up. This is what creates the positive adaptation. You need to make the enzyme pathways more efficient in getting the pyruvate in and in taking it through these steps of the Krebs cycle. Okay, so doing the anaerobic bit, which is doing something of hard work, high intensity, it makes the aerobic bit quicker. That would mean, for example, that you would run your 5K quicker. It would mean that you would go up the stairs without getting out of breath instead of getting out of breath. Yeah, so the amount of work, the amount of output that you can do and still be within your aerobic capacity is higher. You're changing the anaerobic threshold. Okay, so if you do training where you don't create this big build-up outside the mitochondria, you actually don't give it any reason to change. So you don't create any positive adaptation. Okay, this is the first reason. The second reason is all about lactate and processing lactate. What's lactate? Well, when you build up this ton of pyruvate by doing your high intensity exercise, it doesn't just stay like that. The cell says, oh no, we've got a ton of pyruvate, we're going to convert it into lactate so that we can store it. This is a hockey ball. This lactate is the same thing that produces that burning feeling in your muscles when you did something very intense. So if you did a lot of sprints one after another, or if you did one heavy weight exercise for a longer time, you start to get to this burning feeling. That's the lactic acid. So this burning feeling tells you, please stop doing the exercise, I can't handle it anymore. Yeah? And then after you stop doing the exercise, the lactate will gradually get converted back into pyruvate and start having this effect on the mitochondria of making it speed up. But the lactate also does something else. It goes on a big journey in your body. So it also drains out of your muscle cells into your blood. It ends up reaching the liver. In the liver, it gets transformed back into pyruvate, and the pyruvate goes through a process of gluconeogenesis back into glucose. Amazing. The glucose then gets taken into your blood, back to the muscle cells, and you can use it to make more energy. This whole cycle, from the muscle cell to the liver, back to the muscle, turning lactate back into glucose, is called the Cori cycle. And you could think of this as another way of increasing your fitness, training all of the enzymes and transporters that make that cycle possible to also have a positive adaptation. And this is another measure of fitness because say you would be doing something more intense, running up the stairs, your muscles don't tire so quickly, they don't get clogged up with lactate and burning so quickly. They can process the lactate back into glucose more quickly. You might see this, for example, on a football pitch, being able to sprint and then recover and sprint and recover and sprint and recover. And this recovery ability is your ability to process lactate. And again, if you were doing low intensity exercise and you were never really building up a lot of lactate because you were staying that the aerobic step was enough to provide your needs, then you never even change your lactate processing ability. Okay, the third aspect to consider in what actually happens during high versus low intensity training is about the metabolism of fats and glycogen. Glycogen was the glucose storage. When you do high intensity exercise, this higher level of muscular exertion basically triggers the release of a few particular hormones, basically stress hormones, things like adrenaline and also glucagon. Okay, this triggers the glycogen stores in your muscles to be cleaved off into glucoses, which get metabolized. Okay, your muscles have big stores of glycogen, which was the glucose altogether. So these hormones trigger more of the storage to release glucose to get metabolized. Those same hormone pathways, remember, hormones are going through your blood, so they're having like a system effect, not just a muscle effect. These same hormones produce the release of something called hormone-sensitive lipase, and this releases fatty acids from your fat stores into your blood, where they get carried along by a protein called albumin to your muscle cells. Let's call the fat ones this red ball, this is a cricket ball. They get into your muscle cells, they also get taken into the mitochondria, and they get metabolized to produce 35 ATP. It's also quite a lot. But that metabolism of your storage of glycogen and fat, it's only triggered from this high level of exertion, not from a low level exertion like walking along in the park. So what we can see is that high intensity exercise has a really big effect on your fat stores and your glycogen stores. And this creates a really big change in your body's metabolism. This is important for our next reason, which is about insulin sensitivity. So now we're on point number 4 of what high intensity training is doing. So, high intensity training metabolizes much more glucose than low intensity training. We've established that. Now, this metabolism of glucose allows your cells to become more sensitive to insulin. Many people lose their insulin sensitivity because we're walking around kind of full of glucose, because we eat a lot of carbs and we exercise at a lower intensity, or we're more inactive. Insulin is what helps your cells to take up glucose from the blood into the cells. And if everything's already maxed out on glucose, then they're not going to do that, and they become desensitive to insulin. This makes your body produce more insulin, which makes the cells get inflamed. It's a process that in the end leads to different kinds of cardiovascular problems and also increases the risk of diabetes. So if you're doing high intensity exercise where you're using a lot of glucose, and as we said, then breaking down tons of glucose from the glycogen stores, then there's such a big change in the glucose levels in your muscles that afterwards, in the recovery period, insulin gets active again to bring more glucose back into the muscle cells to replenish them. Okay, so it helps to resensitize your muscle cells to insulin. This is just a great thing from the body's perspective. And this is much more efficient than only trying to change things through your diet. Another thing that happens when there's too much glucose inside the cells and they're insensitive to insulin is that the glucose, via pyruvate, gets converted into fatty acids, which go to be stored as fat. So not only did you not end up depleting your fat stores, but through having an excess of glucose in the cells, that glucose ends up getting converted into fat for new fat stores. Okay, now let's consider one more reason why high intensity is so much more useful than low intensity, and that has to do with atrophy and injury. So when you would be doing low intensity exercise, it tends to be of a much longer duration. You go on a 30-minute run, for example. The repetition that's involved in this actually really increases the chance of injury in the long term through all of that wear and tear. So if you go to 15, 20 years later of having done regular jogging or running, you start to see knee injuries, low back injuries, things like that. Not only that, but the repetition involved in the low intensity exercise actually gives your body the stimulus to make the muscles smaller, so they undergo atrophy. This means they have a lower level of glycogen storage, so they're much quicker to be so full of glucose and glycogen, so they're much quicker to be insulin desensitized and also to end up having to shunt off the glucose for fat storage. So this is what happens through sustained low intensity exercise, which ends up in your muscles actually reducing in size. So that's it. I hope this has explained a little bit through these different metabolic pathways of why high intensity training is so useful. If I summarize a bit, we can see that aerobic training might be working on this mitochondrial level, but you can't separate the aerobic part from the anaerobic part. So it would be better to train in a way that uses both parts. And we can see that when we do use both parts, a ton of other metabolic changes can happen, all of which have a huge impact on your body. So what we could say is the center of your metabolic health is your muscular system, not your cardiovascular system. So if you're wanting to create a positive change in your body and in your fitness, then you need to be training the muscular system. And I hope this helps to shift a little bit your approach to your exercise. Remember, high intensity training is very short. You only need to spend a few minutes compared to a few hours per week. So that's an added benefit. So for some examples of how to do this, I have a few different high intensity interval training or strength training videos around on this YouTube channel. Maybe you can explore those. You're also welcome to find out a bit more about me by looking at my website, www.sophiadavis.de. And I hope you enjoyed this and have fun training.